On today's episode, we are sharing the audio from me being a guest on the Experience by Design podcast that is hosted by Gary, David, and Adam Gamwell. We have a very engaging conversation about culture, about engagement, about observations of human behavior, and then how do we, again, breathe oxygen into ourselves, but also to the cultures around us. So I really hope you enjoy the conversation that they shared with me, and now I am sharing with you. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
Stay tuned at the end of the episode to hear from Jason about his new book, Breathing Oxygen, and a special request he has for his listeners.
Hey everybody, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast. So excited that you are here, so excited that you're listening again, and if you're one of the OGs, somebody that's been with us from the very beginning of this podcast, welcome back. So glad you are continuing to find value, and this continues to contribute to your life, your work, your team, your organization. So excited about that. If you're new to the pod, so glad you are here. This continues to grow, to spread, and continues, my commitment to you is that this is a place for you to step back, to think, to be fueled, hopefully that breathes good oxygen into you so that you can think about, your thermostat, who you're wanting to be in the world, what you're trying to accomplish as a team, as an organization, as a family, community, whatever that might be for you, and hoping this is a spot to do that. As always, if you will do me the favor, this is something I hate asking about, but it's just so critical in the world today for anybody to find these podcasts, helps make it more accessible to others. If you will rate the podcast 5 stars, of course, on whatever platform that you are listening to, if you'll leave a nice review, if you'll help share episodes that authentically resonate with you, with your network, on social media, wherever is authentic for you, that's the way that this thing spreads, like anything. So thanks to everybody that does that. So excited. So before we share the audio with you from that interview, again, of me being a guest on the Experience by Design podcast hosted by Gary, David, and Adam Gamwell, let me just tell you quickly a little bit about them because they're doing great work and are I've gotten to know them recently, and certainly they were very nice to invite me to be a guest on their podcast. And the more I learn about the stuff they're into, the more I'm excited about everything that they're doing. So Gary David is a professor of sociology and a professor of information design and corporate communication at Bentley University. He is the founder of Ethno-Analytics, a consultancy that focuses on integrated design and experience alignment. He also speaks. He's an organizational educator. You can check him out at garyconnects.com. And then also Adam Gamwell, the co-host of the Experience by Design podcast, is a business and design anthropologist, an award-winning podcaster, media maker, and entrepreneur. He is the creator and host of The Anthro Life, a podcast that explores humanity's creative potential through design, culture, and technology. And co-host of course, Experience by Design, one of the episodes you're going to hear in just a second. That's a podcast about how to design a better world. So he's founder of Anthro Curious, a social impact storytelling and insights collaborative. I really enjoyed my conversation with both Gary and Adam, and I wanted to share it with you, and I hope you enjoy it now.
As I was looking at your past, Jason, I was very conflicted about whether to like you or not, because I saw you went to Denison, and I was doing a little research on this, and Steve Carell went to Denison, and Steve Carell, actually, quick story, Steve Carell's brother used to cut my lawn.
No way.
Yes,
no, because small world.
Steve Carell is from the town next to where I live. He's from Acton, Mass. And so he's a local guy. So I'm like, okay, Jason's cool. he went to college where Steve Carell went. But then you also went to college where Woody Hayes went. And that's where we ran into difficulty because I'm from Michigan originally.
This is where we've got challenges here, buddy.
This is where we got challenges because I'm like, he went to college, the same school as Woody Hayes. And that's a lot for me to get over, to tell you the truth.
All right. So let me clarify. So I went to Denison. You're right. You are correct. I went to Denison. After Denison, I did a program at Georgetown. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and was born in Columbus, Ohio. I didn't go to Ohio State, but I was born in the shadow of the horseshoe where Woody Hayes and many others have. So when you are born there, you are indoctrinated into Buckeye culture, and I've got season tickets. We are crazy fans. So this is where we are challenged, and I'll just apologize. I know Michigan, somehow got us last year, but I just apologize. I'm beating up on you for
Here we go.
Better part of the last decade or so.
Here
I'm sorry.
We go. and that's the funny thing about this. I didn't even go to University of Michigan. They wouldn't let me in. Yeah. But you grow up in southeastern Michigan. You grow up in the Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler era. You kind of get indoctrinated into these larger biases, which, as I often say to people, the thing you need to know about Ohio is they had to build amusement parks to try to convince people to visit there. I mean, so there is that, Cedar Point's really nice, and SeaWorld and Kings Island and all that fun stuff. But, we couldn't get people to come here on its own. So let's just build a bunch of stuff and maybe they'll come.
Well, I appreciate that. And is it Tim Allen that Michigan had to go recruit to do the whole Pure Michigan, ads that are beautiful, by the way?
After my time,
come experience Pure Michigan.
Did you know?
I mean, isn't that Tim Allen? Isn't that who they got the voice to do the
probably he's from there. I mean, it's a weird Michigan lineage between Tim Allen and Bob Seger and Ted Nugent and the MC5. I mean, there's a lot going on in Motown. So, but it does get into I just think about this notion of how the legacies of the early parts of our past and how we're raised impact our present, and wait for this segue, and how that relates to organizations.
There, look at this.
Whoa. I know, just smoothly and seamlessly moved in this other area.
Didn't see that coming.
I rarely do. This is why this is where magic happens. But it's funny that I didn't go to Michigan, you didn't go to Ohio State, but nevertheless we feel this identification with these larger organizations that somehow define ourselves, our lives, and our relationships.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt the environment that we grow up around, the things that we end up spending our time and our energy on, they certainly make an impact on how we enter the world and see the world, no doubt.
So one of the things that is, I think, a fun part of your bio that if folks are coming to get to know you a little bit, that you kind of have this tagline, I guess, that you kind of traded off a lot of staying in one place to kind of sleeping in airports and observing human behavior. And so this seems like one of the most interesting spots to think about that, because thinking of where we come from and how that shapes who we are, airports are these interesting transient spaces, right, where we see people at their perhaps best and worst.
No doubt.
So I'd love to kind of jump into this a little bit too, and kind of get a sense of how is the what inspired you about airports in terms of a place of seeing human behavior, and what did this kick off for you in terms of your next kind of pathway? Yeah.
No, thanks for the question. What Adam's referencing is the very first book that I wrote back in 2008, believe it or not. It was called Step Back from the Baggage Claim, Change the World, Start at the Airport. And I similar to what you just described, I always thought airports were fascinating. I loved the adventures that I was lucky to get to go on as a kid. And then also really the time right before I wrote the book, at a time when I was lucky to be leading and taking really what ended up to be over a course of years, thousands of people to go internationally to build houses for people literally living in the dirt. And so it became this very interesting space, the airports that is, of watching people that everybody is transient, going different directions with different agendas. Everybody's trying to get somewhere else. And yet our lives collide right in this hectic space where there are so many obstacles, delays, cancellations, and yet how we handle that and how we, what I talk about is kind of traveling gracefully and watching how do we approach not just, we've all talked about not just the destination, but the journey, but then what difference does that make on the people around us? And so Step Back from the Baggage Claim is about this. How do we move throughout the world? Not it's using air travel as a metaphor, but not literally just in the airports, but for our lives. And then where people naturally begin to take it is for their organizations, for their teams. How do we move throughout, around the metaphorical baggage claims of our lives? What is it we're trying to claim? Do we step back to see things from different perspective? And ultimately, then, how are we committed to moving together? And that metaphor just became really rich to me, and fortunately resonated with a whole lot of people. So that was kind of took this off on a different direction.
I'm kind of curious about your process. It's the fact that you noticed this thing and then it turned into a book. So what was that journey like? I guess I'm asking because I struggle with something similar. It's how do you turn a noticing into, well, there's something there that's an idea, that's a kernel of an idea. And then I'm going to expand it out into a larger book that makes a larger point than just, the baggage claim.
Yeah, well, I'm a strange guy. One, that's the first point I'll make, because I'm a strange, weird guy. So I see you giving thumbs up. So I think you appreciate it, and you are probably strange yourselves. Actually, I was just having a drink with somebody last night that is in the process of writing their first book, and was asking very similar questions. My fourth book is actually coming out this August, and so we're talking about the process of that. And everybody that I've ever talked to that's written or and published things is everybody has their own process, of course. For me, and the way that I would answer that, Gary, is that for me, I have these ideas that just marinate and marinate and marinate. And I continue to kind of take notes, make little reminders to myself. I pull little stories and things that I think come into that idea. And I can't really explain why and when, but all of a sudden I have this feeling in my gut when I just know there's something more there that kind of needs to come out. And I know that isn't maybe the most tactically helpful advice or things that I'm describing, because for me, it marinades in the idea, and I think I'm always thinking about it in the background. And then all of a sudden I have this moment in my gut that says it's time to try to bring this to life. And that was the case with the first book. I had no idea what I was doing. I had this concept around a baggage claim and a metaphor of air travel and these things that I had reflected on for years, but I had no idea whether or not I could artfully craft the story and tell a compelling story that would connect a metaphor to obviously mean something for our lives, for our teams, for our businesses. And so then I think it's a matter of, once you have that nudging, or at least for me, this kind of, you have to create it, then it's a matter of diving into the craft. And for me, I just have to go away. I have to I typically binge write. I go off for a few days to a cabin or something. And for that first book, I literally wrote 80% of it during the week that I was living in airports, because I was there. I was consumed by it. And I just have to kind of dive into the craft of storytelling.
Yeah, and I wonder, I teach a course on employee experience. I'm teaching it this summer. And one of the things that we often talk about in this course is the increasing extent to which people feel unfulfilled in their professions, in part because of the fact that they can't let these things that are in them come out. And I don't know, you talk about culture, and Adam's an anthropologist, I'm a sociologist, so we study culture and society. Is this a new thing with maybe Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, where it's like, I need more fulfillment than just a paycheck, whereas earlier generations may have felt okay with, I come to work, I do my job, I leave, and I find fulfillment outside of work, whereas generations today need to find it through work, and the workplace is necessarily set up to provide that.
Yeah, I think generationally we are evolving in that and these are just my observations, right? And you guys certainly know the research and data around it that would probably support this idea. But I think, we think about our parents' generations or even our grandparents' generation, they were into a role where the culture around them was you enter a job and you put your head down and you grind for 30 or 40 years. And that's just what you do, right? And as we got into then Gen X, I think people started to try to follow in those footsteps, but then also began to see that, hey, maybe there was a little bit of a movement, an ability to jump around to a couple of different jobs. Now, obviously, with Gen Z, millennials, like people that are younger folks, now it is much more common, of course, and I believe that are asking some good questions. And I think purpose and fulfillment has always been something that's been important to people throughout that through line of the generations. But I think now it's become more normalized to be able to ask those questions and say that maybe I want something greater for my life and for my contribution to my work, to my skill set, to my whatever that I can bring. And so a lot of the questions that they're asking are really fundamentally good questions. And obviously, and you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with all the research and data around that people are looking for more meaningful work cultures. They want to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they are valued, that they get to contribute. They're not just a number or a name, that they actually have a say, and that they also know that they are being developed and their skill set is valued in ways. And so this now isn't just an add-on. This is what people want, need. And so I think we've always known that in our gut, maybe from the employee experience side of things. And I think where a lot of the evolution is now starting to go is now employers are starting to become more aware that, hey, we better marry this, or else what we're experiencing with the Great Resignation and other things is going to continue to happen, because people, if they don't feel a connection to this meaningful culture, then they'll just simply go somewhere else.
Yeah, and especially that seems that the Great Resignation is a really good example of that. I think that folks have felt more empowered to take it upon themselves to rethink, what is the purpose of my work, and do I feel valued, right? Do I feel like I'm part of a community, or do I feel like I belong? And if I don't, then I'm more willing to kind of make that reassess and make that change. It's interesting that like sometimes it can take something like a pandemic, right, to make people kind of wake up a little bit. Or I think you're 100% right though, Jason, that we know it in our gut, but there's not necessarily the social structure, right, or certainly the workplace structure that we're allowed to then say, well, I might think my boss is a jerk, but it may not be that extreme. It could be just more like I don't really get on with my colleagues, right? I don't feel like I actually have a decision. I don't get to make decisions that actually impact me, right? The things that kind of get handed down to me. And so it's interesting to see these kinds of questions that employees and now employers are having to kind of ask and pay attention to. I'm curious. I think that. Hold on. Yeah.
Let me jump in just for 1 second, because I think what you're saying, Adam, is really an important point. Is also, I think, the culture that over the years that we have evolved into also is what I refer to as that we honor busyness rather than effectiveness. And so we oftentimes in our own personal lives, but also within teams and throughout organizations, is we've honored this kind of multitasking, quickness, just always running. And we've got so much stuff going on. And again, if you want to equate it back to that frenzy around the baggage claim, is that even if we know something in our gut, oftentimes we're so rushed and so hurried that we don't actually stop and take the time to say, what would we do differently? And so allowing ourselves then to kind of step back, which I think the pandemic and other things that we've been experiencing over the last 2 years have really allowed us in some ways to step back. And then I think some of those gut feelings now, once we've stopped the hurried rush, have emerged to then say, okay, what is it we really want? And proactively, what is the culture that I want for my own life that I want to be a part of? And then again, I think teams and leaders and organizations are now asking that question even more so is, man, what is that proactive culture that we are creating so that we can be a place that can retain the great people we already have, attract the people that may want to be a part of this, and then develop the talent that we already have.
Yeah, I think that's right on, and that's a really great point. And it's interesting to see the like growing connection between these two, right? There's the kind of we might say employee side and employer side, right? And that on one level, it's interesting because we are all humans, right? Some of us may employ, some of us may be employed, but we still share the same kind of fundamental questions of like, do I want purpose in my work, right? And it's interesting because you tend to see, C-suite and leaders talk about like mission and purpose, right? And like that, this is what our organization is about. But the question is like, how far does that quote unquote trickle down to every employee, right? And so that's an interesting, that middle ground is, I think, where we're seeing this kind of conversation play out more and more today.
Yeah, no doubt. And what I'm seeing, and then certainly the companies and the organizations that I'm lucky to support in this way, is helping that, as you articulated, that it often starts at that C-suite level of people talking about mission and purpose and about the values of the company, or again, my language that I talk about in my book, Thermostat Cultures, is what is that temperature that we're trying to set. But the best companies, and again, the ones that I've been lucky to help with this, is when the C-suite realizes that it can't just be a top-down mandate, that we have to proactively, part of shaping culture is it isn't just being dictated from quote unquote above, but that we begin to involve and really elicit participation from frontline folks, from middle management folks, from throughout the organization in a participatory process that really helps people have a voice and engage in what is the culture that you want? What is it we want? And isn't just a C-suite, hey, this is the culture we're going to have, but it is a participatory, what I talk about is conversations that are the currency for change. And then together we can, as we better articulate that future culture we're all committed to creating, then at the different roles and places in the organization, then we can begin to get very strategic about how we implement that culture in the way that we not just talk about it, but we link it to action and behavior.
I'm glad to hear you say middle management. I was thinking about another metaphor of if leadership is the thermostat, then middle management is the insulation, or the pink fibrous stuff that if you get on your skin, it's really itchy. But I often hear about top down or bottom up, but I seldom hear about middle out. It's what I call middle out. And that so much of what happens at middle management is these unfunded mandates, so to speak, or under-resourced mandates where we have all these great ideas. And here's another thing you need to do on top of the other things you need to do. Now go do it. And middle management might totally embrace whatever it is that is being, said or recommended or instructed, but it becomes another thing in the list of other things that aren't taken away and aren't supported. And I even think about, I do work in DEI, and, no one has training in how to do this. Yep. It's just there. And why are we doing it? Because someone said it needs to be done. And how do I do it? Figure it out. And now then that breeds resentment and anxiety, because now you have another thing you need to do without knowing what it is you're doing or why it is you're doing it.
Yeah, no, Gary, that's a great point, because that is the ethic that I think happens in many different organizations, and it's I choose to believe it comes from a good place. It's like, hey, we need a DEI initiative, or we need a culture shaping proactive process that we want to initiate, and it comes from a spirit of I think I choose to believe a good place, but oftentimes where it again maybe stalls or doesn't have the impact that it might have is that the person being asked to lead it maybe doesn't have any experience doing that, and or isn't sure, just hey, go shape the culture, and like, okay, I love that idea, but what is it that I should do? Maybe they aren't equipped to do that. What I'm at least seeing, and I think where there's a great deal of I think we should feel good about progress that's being made, is I see more and more organizations and more leaders and even at that middle management level that are realizing that we need to have support, and that this can't just be an extra add-on on top of everything else that you do. Hey, here's this initiative that you need to go do, that they're really seeing that, hey, culture is everything. It is the air that we breathe. And so it's not an extra thing we do when we have time to work on it, or an extra program that we're going to now ask you to go do. We all have to be invested in the creation of that, and then seeking support and tools and outside folks to help guide and lead and partner with them to do that. I see a greater understanding of that than I think some of that older thinking that I hear you describing. Now, that absolutely still exists, certainly in many places, but I see that I think it's getting better in that way.
Anyway, one of the things that's interesting to me is, two people, Adam and I, who come from professions who for over 100 years have been saying culture is everything.
Yeah.
Finally seeing organizations go, you know what? Culture is everything.
That's
and
right.
We're going,
that's right.
And I do wonder, is it a failing on our part as social scientists for not communicating adequately? Partly, for sure. And to what extent is it a failure on organization or leadership for not recognizing what anybody in an Anthro or Social 100 class would learn maybe on the first day?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's above my pay grade, buddy, to know exactly what the answer to that question is. But I think I think it's, no, I don't think it's your fault. I think it partially is our fault. I think there's always, like, could we articulate things better, differently? Like somehow the language or the way we describe things, I think about, not to take us off on a tangent, but how much, and you guys know this in culture shaping, that I talk about language drives behavior. And so we have to be able to articulate things and describe what it is we're trying to create, or else things get lost in translation. And the image that I remember, if you remember when all the talk about global warming and climate change began, really what, like, people could point to it, no matter what you think about it. Like, people could begin to talk about it, but we fumbled for many years through the language and got caught up in the language of it. We started talking about the greenhouse effect, and people weren't sure like what that really meant. And if you weren't an avid greenhouse person, then why would you understand what that means in terms of the environment? Then we started to go to global warming, and eventually we got to climate change, and what the language has started, the precision to the language has gotten better, which has then been, we still have a long way to go of people even wrapping their heads around it, but the language helps get us there. So I do think there's probably, to your point, that there's have we articulated well enough over the years? And then I also think there's just an evolution of thinking and things in the world around us happen, like pandemics and things we've just experienced, these intense issues of social justice and systemic racism, this political and economic uncertainty. Where are my kids going to school? Are we remote, or are we, are workers hybrid, remote, in person? All this stuff that's been changing. And I think then it's revealed itself that, oh my gosh, this is as important as ever. And now it's way easier to say and to realize that culture is everything.
My language for global warming was just death weather. I was hoping that would catch on. There's going to be an outbreak of death weather.
Yeah. And we still have all these examples around us of things that are happening. And again, I'm no scientist. I don't know. I can't articulate all that well, but I use that again, just as an example of it takes language to help us describe it to somebody else so that we can even be talking about the same thing.
If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
And in figuring out what that shared language even is, I think is one of the interesting challenges that we have, because it's a bit about what vocabulary do we use, but also things like how do we address one another, right? Like how do we think about the power between individuals in different relationships, and who has you mentioned before in terms of like some of the consulting work that you do is helping organizations and different folks at probably different levels have voices, and or the flip side I think about is how to be heard by others too, right? Because sometimes we may not be trained to listen. So I think that's like one of the really interesting challenges. I'd love to kind of dive into that. Maybe some examples of things, if you can share, of things that you've kind of worked with about this. Like how do we get folks to rethink language, and then how are we talking about what change means? How are we talking about culture in an organization that gets people to pause and say, oh yeah, we actually do need to rethink what it means to have culture and to promote it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question, and I'll give you one example. So, oftentimes when a company asks and says, "Hey, Jason, we want you to help us change the culture or be a part of a culture changing initiative of some sort," oftentimes the very first thing I say back to them is, "Well, the culture is already changing." So it's not a matter of will it change. It is. It's because culture is dynamic, so it's changing moment by moment every day. And I said, so the question isn't, is it changing? The question is, what role do you and I and everyone in the organization, what role do we want to play and what we want it to become? And are we going to be strategic and intentional and proactive about shaping it? And so oftentimes in those kind of scenarios, I love the example I give is I'll walk in then as I'm meeting folks and learning about their company, and I'll say, well, tell me about your values. Tell me about the core values of this company, and what do you think is rooted in this, in not just what you do, no matter what industry you're in or what it is that you do, but how you're committed to showing up and collaborating and working together. What's that value system? And oftentimes, they point up on the wall and they've got a big integrity or a word like that up on the wall. And they say, one of their values is integrity. And I said, oh, well, that's great. Tell me what it looks like in action and behavior to work with integrity here, no matter what role you might be in. And they oftentimes fumble over, it means integrity. Like we all know what integrity. Well, we all don't know what integrity means. And so even a word like that is used so frequently, and a word like culture, which I think is a really important thing, that how we define that and talking about it. So integrity, then we have to be able to really deconstruct and define what is it we mean by integrity. And then to your point is we need to bring people into participation. And so part of the processes that I've led with many, many companies and organizations of involving cross-functional people. So at different levels throughout the organization, to come together and talk about this desired culture that they hope to have of not just what they do and how they do it, and then diving into the language of, and so that we are all participating, we're all listening to each other, and we all have an opportunity to try to articulate it. And then through over time of talking about it, we can get more clear on so if it is a word like integrity that we end up with is, how do what does that look like in action and behavior? Whether I'm the C-suite person, I'm the person that sweeps the floor, I'm the, front desk person, I'm the salesperson, how can we then, and I often talk about that values are a tool, they're not a poster.
that we need to make sure that, yes, we have great posters, but the more important thing is, are our posters in our people? And so we have to recognize that language is the tool to help us communicate and connect it, and language helps drive the behavior that we're committed to.
And the interesting flip side there too, that if language is the great connector and driver of change, but then it can also be a stumbling block if we don't. I think integrity is a great example, right? We're like, I don't really know what that means, or what it looks like.
Absolutely.
So I can't move forward with that.
Yeah, and that's actually, Adam. That's a great. That's one of the things I talk about is language helps drive behavior, and it's so critical. And I talk about precision of the language, and yet at the same time, we also have to recognize that language is imperfect.
One of the things that makes me wonder about regarding integrity is this idea of profitability versus values versus service orientation. I was watching CNBC the other day, and they were asking whether or not ethics and social responsibility is profitable. I mean, is that the right question to be asking here? I mean, I'm not saying you want it to be unprofitable, but if it's less profitable in terms of a bottom line than being, not ethical, shouldn't we just be good with that? I mean, there's this notion of do we equate DEI with increased profitability? Do we increase a service orientation with increased profitability? And how do you get at this larger notion of a shareholder orientation of, maximizing return and profitability versus a stakeholder orientation around how do we service the larger good for all of those who are involved?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And I think this really goes into that space that I was just describing of where I think we are, as I still think we are in this time of evolution between generations and evolving in our thinking around, again, if culture is everything, then again, it's a part of profitability is one element of this. And it's not the only thing, and then everything else is extra. And I think we're still evolving into that space. But when I first started talking about these concepts of culture and started, supporting places and speaking about it a lot and writing about it a lot, one of the things I found really quickly was that people there's a certain subset of people that really need to see that their thinking is that, this is an add-on, an extra thing. And so the first thing is profitability. And then if we're profitable, then we can think about all this other stuff, rather than thinking that there actually is there's an ROI, there's a return on the investment of just doing good, what I would refer to as doing good business. And part of that is how we collaborate together, and the environment and the culture that we create for people to be in meaningful work environments actually elevates their performance, and actually then leads to greater profitability. And what I realized is that some people still need kind of that case. They need the business case, if you will, for why do these things. And so the DEI or whatever example you just referenced is like, I think we're going to get to a point where we realize that, yes, that's just a part of the whole picture of our business, and not just profitability as the single only important thing. And yet what we've had to get better at, and what I've had to get better at, is helping to connect the dots for some of those people of, hey, there is a return on the investment for all this culture stuff. If you want to look at turnover rates, if you want to look at attracting talent, you want to look at developing talent, you want to look at then the performance metrics that leads to. All of those things have an uptick when people have this sense of belonging and a connection to a culture that they want to be a part of, that their performance actually raises. And so I think part of that evolution that we are experiencing, and I think we're going to experience even more, is more and more leaders that are enlightened to the fact that all of these things are absolutely connected to performance. And it isn't just profitability isn't the only thing. Now, hear me say this, like, of course, businesses and organizations need to be profitable or else they won't exist.
So, but it's not the only thing. And that's where I think the evolution of thinking is happening.
I think that also, when people talk about profitability, going back to language, it's almost like they are assuming it's binary. You're profitable or you're not. And one of the questions I often, and I work at a business school, so one of the questions I often ask my students is, what's the profit margin, right? How much profit do you need, and where does that profit then go? And it's, we can reap profit financially, but enter into a deficit spiritually, if I can use that language. Yeah. So profitability at the expense of spirituality leaves you with, I would say, a pretty large deficit in terms of your life. I mean, one of the reasons why I study workplaces, and I've always studied workplaces, is that workplaces are the context in which we get socialized into our broader social relationships. It forms so much of who we are outside of work.
That's right.
And so what happens and this creates a moral obligation, I think, of leadership to be stewards of environments that will then spread out into other parts of our lives.
Gary, I think that you and I talked about this on our very first introduction to each other, when somebody said we just needed to meet, needed to know each other. And that, in fact, in my newest book that's coming out this August called Breathing Oxygen, I talk about the need for all of us, like what is the oxygen that we are breathing into ourselves, the mindsets that we are fueling, and then how are we breathing oxygen into the people around us? And I make that very same case that we, right now, our places of work are have the greatest opportunity to have impact for us socially, because they're the places that we spend 8, 10, 12 hours, however many hours of the day you spend. That these are the places that where we intersect with people that are different than we are, that we aren't just going back to our own little neighborhood or wherever we may be, that these are the places, our places of work have the greatest opportunity to help us grow, develop, learn how to move throughout the world in new ways. But we're going to have to breathe oxygen into that, rather than just colliding around with each other. Again, what we're realizing is that people want to be in environments that they feel like is breathing oxygen into them as a human, but also that we as employers are realizing part of our role, it's not just about profitability. Part of our existence in this world is to help breathe oxygen into people. One of the ways we do that is by paying them. Yes, but that's not the only way. And we've got to get better about breathing good oxygen into each other.
And thinking about that like multilaterally too, right? Because it's again, not just the organization going outside into me as a person, but then how do we do it as folks within an organization too, right? And
that's right.
Kind of the lungs kind of work in 360.
Yeah, breathing is something that we do, fortunately, like involuntarily, and is that you see those places that people celebrate for, and you hear they win awards or people talking about, man, they've got an amazing culture there, and it's just, it's something like is in the air. It's just the way they breathe. Like, well, it's because of so many intentional and strategic and development things that they have done for so many little ways over years that, yes, it has become kind of the involuntarily way that they breathe. But breathing is also something that we do voluntarily. When we are stressed, when we are facing an obstacle, when we need a moment to just step back and take a deep breath and clear our minds, we know that the quality of air that we breathe in impacts the very next performance and breath that we have. I mean, ask an elite athlete that how important that deep breath is, and they'll tell you, right? We also know that when we get pulled into breathing in toxic air of blame, of negativity, of gossip, of finger pointing, that also becomes kind of corrosive and poisonous and toxic to ourselves and also to the people around us. And so voluntarily, we have an opportunity, just as you were saying, Adam, is to also not only what is it that we're breathing individually, but how do we breathe that into our teammates? And from an organization standpoint, very intentionally, how do we breathe oxygen into our people? and realizing that's part of our goal.
I think COVID has made it very clear that people breathe in 360 degrees.
Yeah, no doubt.
Stop breathing, especially as I was grocery shopping yesterday. I was just like, could you breathe less, because I'm feeling very anxious right now. And being responsible, but to use that metaphor, being conscious and responsible for what we are doing to those around us. And this became part of this, going back to individualism, collectivism, and our responsibility to one another for the environment that we are creating collectively. That it's your right to do X, Y, or Z, but you also have an obligation in a society in which we're living together to consider what impact your decisions have on others, and how that might negatively impact them or positively impact them. I was looking at research that talked about, going back to language, the way in which mask mandates were framed, or mask recommendations were framed, was this is something to protect you. In other countries, it was this is something to protect others. Mm. And how do we create this orientation to something fundamental as breathing to a social contract and the environment that we're creating for one another?
Yeah. So that's a really wonderful example of language, and then the way that we set up the language of then how that takes us in a particular viewpoint, right? Sanjay Gupta, the physician that is on the Today Show and all national and global news networks. During the pandemic, they were talking to him and saying one of the things he said that I still remember is he said, "My health is dependent on your behavior, and your health is dependent on my behavior." And as he said that, I started thinking, again, we were talking about a global pandemic at the time, so we're talking about literal health. But I started to think about it also as that's a cultural statement. That is that as we start to adopt that kind of thinking within our teams and organizations, that my health, meaning not just my literal physical health, but my emotional health, my physical, my spiritual health, my performance at my work, my behavior is dependent also on you, and yours is on me. That we are in this co-creation together and a partnership to try to accomplish something together that we can't accomplish on our own. When we boil it down, what is an organization? I'd say this very simply: is all it is a collection of humans, that have come together to try to accomplish something that they can't on their own. If they could do it on their own, we wouldn't need to form these organizations and stuff. But no, we need other people with different skill sets and different, viewpoints and more people to do different tasks and jobs. But we are all co-creating that experience and that culture and are dependent upon one another.
And I think that's the great point that, also just hits on this idea that, to think of our 360 metaphor too, that it, like an organization to function and as a collective to do that which we can't do by ourselves, like how important that is also to, I think, help leadership remember that, right? Because oftentimes it's more like, well, this is the organization, these are our values, this is who we are, you should love what you do, right? And that kind of top-down approach that just doesn't really fly as much today. And I think for good reason, right? Because as people are asking deeper questions like, why do I spend the majority of my waking hours with this group of people or this organization, besides getting paid? Like we need to, that's on one level. That's a profitability.
That's a baseline thing.
Baseline.
Exactly. And no longer is that enough. I mean, and again, the research shows us that, and even the people right now within the Great Resignation that are jumping to places that are trying to solve the problem by just throwing money at it. Are also realizing that's not in the end enough. That's not what people, even the person says, all I want is money. That's not true. It's not true. Eventually that's not true.
Yeah. I think that's 100% right. And that's super important, I think, to help organizations recognize that too, right? That there is, on one level, like it's weird because it's free to make culture. It doesn't cost anything to let's have a conversation and talk about what it is that we're looking to do together. But interesting, that is, that we're at this interesting inflection point, or you phrase it as we're in this interesting moment of evolution between generations where we are rethinking the mandate of what work is, right? And what business is. it's interesting to kind of have it come full circle to remember that this is like the idea of an organization and company, right? It makes me even think of, actually, speaking of language, I don't know if this is actually the case, but the secondhand information that, company, the word company itself meant like company with bread with others, like in terms of like making food and eating together and sharing together. Even this idea of why we even use this word is really interesting. And it may make sense of why we use the metaphor of bread too, like I'm the breadwinner, right? Or like, here, I'm going to spend all my bread on this thing. And so even this idea of that which feeds us is what we do together is important to kind of contemplate what it is that we want organizations to do, And so it's like, that's also this mandate that has gotten me thinking in terms of how do we think back to those kind of roots, right? Why do we get together to do things that we can't do by ourselves? I mean, we evolved to do that as a species. But then it's interesting to think that then it's not just about propping up the leader or the top of an organization itself at the expense of, I think Gary's idea, the expense of our spiritual wellness, right? Mm-hmm. Or something else, that like they're all connected. And so how do we help train organizations to continue to be more kind of holistic in their thinking? So I think the oxygen metaphor, I think, is quite apt in that regard too, that, if you don't have it, you did, but then on top of that, I like the idea that it's both voluntary and involuntary. I think it's really interesting and compelling. A case to make is it's that like, you don't just do it. And it's the same with culture too. You don't just do it. You can be active. You can be passive. Like, it's better to be active. Mindfulness is about knowing that you're breathing, right? And so mindful culture is kind of like, know that you're making culture.
Yep.
Anyway, so I don't know. It's good. It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Thanks, man. No, I appreciate it. And I'm a pretty, I'm not as bright as you guys. So I gotta dumb it down and like be simple.
Well, you're from Columbus, so I mean that's kind of redundant.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Gosh, there's another one. Just
I couldn't help it. I wanted to, and I stopped myself, but then I just couldn't stop myself.
My self-deprecation just put the ball right on the tee, just so you could knock it. But I often just put it. And again, I think this is just one of the reasons why don't we do that stuff that you're just describing, Adam, is like. Well, it's because we're creatures of habit. And so we get in the habit, and again, this spans generations. So we get in the habit of doing something one way or one particular way, or we have systems or approaches or, things that we do within organizations. And very rarely does somebody say, wait, why do we do it that way? Or like, what, why do we always have the Tuesday morning meeting? And what's the point of the Tuesday morning meeting or whatever that is? And eventually we realize that, no, we all share in the creation of this culture. And so we need to ask those challenges and adapt that kind of thinking. And so I often then bring it back to just simple examples. Like if me and my wife, Amy, and our family, like if all we did, and it was only about performance and our family was only about our kids getting up, going to school, getting A's, and like going to their sports and just, and all it mattered was the outcome of their performance, then that will create a particular culture. We know that, right? And when we boil it down very simply, like we're like, oh yeah, of course. Like I can already see what type of parent I would be, what type of experience my kid would have, what type of family we would have. And so, we take family vacations, or we take our kids to lunch, or we spend time talking about values and things that are different than just performance, because we want them to grow and the culture of our family and them as a kid to be shaped by something beyond just performance. And when we talk about it that way, we're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, yeah, that's what we want. And yet, well, why would our team or organization be any different than that? We want to make sure that, yes, performance is a key indicator and important element, but let's make sure that we're developing everything around that helps that performance enhance and the type of performance and culture we really want to have. Let's make sure we're honoring that. Plato said, what is honored will be cultivated. What is honored will be cultivated. So if what we honor is just performance, schedules, getting from point A to point B, then that's what we will cultivate. If we want something different, then we're going to have to be much more intentional and proactive about honoring something different. That's the invitation.
I think that that's an awesome place to end it.
Yeah.
I think that that's really well said. And we have our Plato reference for today.
Yeah.
So that was also,
There you go. Yeah.
that was also,
He hit the quota.
yeah, we did. We have a quota of mentioning one dead philosopher per episode. And I think that was it. So thanks so much, Jason, for taking the time to chat with us.
So great to be with you guys. Appreciate it. Great conversation. And thanks for all the work you guys are doing. Great stuff you're helping people think about and learn and develop. So thank you. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat. Many people have asked recently about the book, and again, how wonderful the launch is going. And what I'll just say is the launch is still happening. Again, you launch a book, and it launched early this August, but it doesn't mean the launch is over. It still is launching, and many people have continued to still ask, how can they help with sharing these messages? And quickly, I'll just share these are a couple of ways. That one is, if you haven't ordered the book yet, is to go out and get it, whether that's at Amazon, whether that's at Amplify, Barnes & Noble, wherever it is you get books. Walk in and go get it, or order it online. Whatever that is for you, is to go get it and then to read it. Obviously, it's wonderful that it's receiving such great reviews and that it has become a number one new release on Amazon and that it's trending in all these great ways. That's so awesome. But more awesome than that and more important to me is that it's impacting people and that it's resonating with people. So not only get the book, but read it. And then I'd love to hear what's resonating with you and how it's impacting you. So order it and read it. The other way you can help with the launch is to share it. If and only if it authentically resonates with you, then to give copies to the people in your life and your work and the people around you or colleagues across the country, around the world that this will resonate with. Help share it. If you're on social media or you have an email network or whatever is authentic for you, if there's things that have resonated with you, share it with other people. Tell them about it and be somebody that helps kind of breathe oxygen into this so that it can share in the world. And then the third thing that I would just ask of you, and this is just so important for the whole launch, is reviews. Whether I like it or not, Amazon reviews and reviews on whatever, wherever you buy the book are so important. So wherever you get it, if you would also take the time to rate the book, hopefully 5 stars, but leave a really positive review about it, that helps the algorithm so other people can find the book. If you have other ideas or other needs for your team and organization, obviously track us down at info@jasonvbarger.com, and we'll try to help in any way to help amplify these messages so that they can reach more and more people and have, breathe good oxygen into others. We all need to breathe in appreciation and gratitude for all that is within our control. Now is a chance for us to positively impact those around us, within our teams, our families, our communities, whoever it is that's around you on your journey. That gives energy to everybody. And calibrating our own personal thermostat for the life and the work that we want to do in the world is all about that personal awareness, and then calibrating that thermostat based on the awareness to develop the relationships around us and to take a step forward to bring it to action and to life. We are the thermostats. And once we're clear on the temperature we want to set, in order to keep that temperature
where we want it and making progress, we're going to continue to need to breathe oxygen into ourselves and also into the people around us. So I hope you'll keep tuning in. We've got so many great episodes that are still coming up in the future. The next episode is a conversation that I have, a chat that I had actually on the Experience by Design podcast. I'm going to share this great chat that I had with David and Adam Gamwell. They are professors and business design anthropologists that were talking about culture and their study and research, and were gracious enough and asked me to be a guest on their podcast. So I want to share that with you all. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat and then breathing good oxygen into themselves and others. Breathe good oxygen. I wrote Breathing Oxygen because I needed to breathe in good oxygen in my own life, and what I'm finding is that other people needed it too. There continues to be high levels of uncertainty and change and division and angst and so much that seems out of our control. It's challenging for individuals and teams and organizations to navigate their way forward. And it's easy to get sucked into negative and toxic mindsets and actions. We all know there are oxygen givers and oxygen takers in every room and in every organization on the planet. And so leaders and teams need to be deliberate about what is the air that they breathe and the mindsets that they feed. When we breathe in good, healthy mindsets, our performance expands. And when we breathe in toxic and negative mindsets of gossip and blame, our performance deflates. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key mindsets. Mindsets of clarity, of inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership and positive accountability. Positive leadership is about being honest and transparent about the challenges we're facing and still choosing to be optimistic and believing that we can create a better future. Winning cultures doesn't just mean winning the contest or becoming best in class or the best at whatever it is that you do, although I hope and we aim for that too. A winning culture is one that is authentic, where people are aligned around creating a compelling culture together that also produces results. Research and data continues to tell us that people want to be a part of a more meaningful culture, that they want to be a part of something greater than self, that they want to contribute, they want to develop, and they want to share in the creation of a compelling culture. But as I talk about in my book, Thermostat Cultures, it won't just happen magically on its own. We have to lead the change that we want and intentionally set the temperature at all levels of the company, and then breathe oxygen into it to keep it going. We all know that culture shaping never stops. We just have to continuously breathe good oxygen.